Sometimes, I wonder if my life would have been different if my dad hadn't passed away that spring morning. I was only 7 years old, but it feels like it happened just yesterday. Dad was making pancakes, his Wednesday tradition. He always shaped them into funny faces that made me laugh. Mom was humming a song I can't remember now while setting the table. "Karen, princess, come help your old man flip these masterpieces," Dad called out, waving his spatula like it was a magic wand. I dropped my favorite stuffed bunny and ran to the kitchen, giggling. But then it happened. The spatula fell to the floor, and Dad clutched his chest, his face twisting in pain. The rest was a blur. Ambulance sirens, hospital hallways, and Mom crying. Just like that, Dad was gone, leaving behind a house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. Mom didn't cry for long, though. She met Brandon at a support group for widowed parents. He seemed kind, tall, with a gentle smile that reminded me a little of Dad. Within a year, they got married, and he moved in with us. I was trying to adjust to having a new father figure when Mom surprised me with more news. She was pregnant. Her face lit up with excitement when she told me I was going to be a big sister. I was 8 when Scott was born, and that's when everything changed. Mom left her job as an elementary school teacher. "Scott needs me," she'd say whenever someone asked why she quit. These early years are so important for a child's development. I wanted to ask if my early years hadn't been important too, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I watched as Mom's world became all about Scott. She started forgetting to pack my lunch for school, then acted surprised when I said I was hungry at dinner. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetie," she'd say, distracted, already turning her attention back to Scott. It didn't happen just once or twice. It became normal. I noticed Brandon watching Mom with a worried look as she focused on Scott, barely noticing me. At dinner, it felt like I wasn't even there. I was sitting alone doing my homework when Brandon sat down beside me. "You know, Karen," he said softly, helping me with a math problem. "Sometimes people get so focused on one thing that they don't notice what else is around them." As Scott got older, the tension in our house grew worse. Brandon tried many times to talk to Mom about how much attention she gave Scott, but it always ended the same way, Mom getting defensive and angry. I remember one night during dinner when Brandon brought it up again. Scott was about 5, playing with his food while Mom hovered over him, trying to get him to take another bite. "Melissa," Brandon said, putting down his fork, "we need to talk about this. You can't keep hovering over him like this. He needs to learn to do things for himself." Mom's expression instantly changed. Her face tightened as she snapped. "What are you saying? That I'm a bad mother?" "That's not what I'm saying, and you know it," Brandon replied calmly. "But you have 3 kids here, not just one. And don't forget, you also have a husband." I kept my head down, pretending to focus on my mashed potatoes, but I was listening to every word. "Scott needs me," Mom said sharply. "He's still so little." I was little too, I mumbled under my breath, but no one seemed to hear me. Things reached a breaking point when Brandon suggested signing Scott up for Little League Baseball. I was sitting on the stairs with my homework when I heard their voices rising in the kitchen. "Absolutely not." Mom's voice was high-pitched and panicked. "Do you know how dangerous baseball can be? He could get hit by a ball, twist his ankle." "For heaven's sake, Melissa," Brandon interrupted, his frustration showing. "He needs to live a little. You can't protect him from everything." But Mom wouldn't change her mind. Instead, she signed Scott up for art classes at the community center. I still remember the way Scott sat there in his art class, dragging his brush across the paper without even trying. The other kids were painting seriously, but Scott didn't seem to care. After just 4 sessions, he quit, and Mom blamed the teacher, saying they didn't understand Scott's creative spirit. Meanwhile, Brandon started spending more time with me. Maybe he was trying to make up for Mom's behavior, or maybe he just saw that I needed someone on my side. He took me to my karate classes 4 times a week and stayed through every session. He was always the loudest cheerleader when I earned a new belt. While I thrived under Brandon's attention, Scott became harder to handle. His room was always a disaster, clothes and toys scattered everywhere. Mom would look at me with that expression I dreaded. "Karen, be a dear and clean up Scott's room," she'd say, not really asking but telling me to do it. One day, Brandon found out about this routine. "She's not his maid, Melissa," he said firmly. "Scott needs to learn to clean up after himself." That's when Mom started crying, her go-to response whenever she wanted to win an argument. "I knew it. You love her more than your own son. How can you treat Scott this way?" I watched as Brandon's face fell, the fight draining out of him. He looked at me with an apologetic expression, then raised his hands in defeat.
"Fine.
"Have it your way," he said quietly before walking away. After that, Brandon stopped arguing with Mom about Scott. But the way he looked at me told me he hadn't given up on me, even if he'd given up on fighting with her. It wasn't much, but it was something, and sometimes something is all you have. When my high school graduation day came, it was bittersweet. As I stood in my cap and gown, I scanned the crowd. I saw Brandon, smiling proudly, cheering for me. Mom was there too, but she kept checking her phone, probably texting Scott's babysitter. Later that evening, Brandon called me into his study. He pulled out a folder full of college brochures. "I've been saving up," he said with a proud smile. "You can go anywhere you want, Karen. The sky's the limit." Before I could respond, Mom burst into the room. "You can't be serious," she exclaimed. "That money should be saved for Scott's future. He's going to need it more." Brandon's face hardened, a look I'd seen many times during their arguments. "This is not up for discussion, Melissa. I've already made my decision," he said firmly. I ended up choosing Midway University in Kentucky. It was far enough to give me a fresh start, but close enough for occasional visits. On move-in day, Brandon came to help me settle into my dorm, but Mom stayed home because Scott couldn't handle her leaving. He had anxiety, as always. College was exactly what I needed. For the first time, I felt free from the constant reminder that I was the less important child. I called home every week, but most of my conversations were with Brandon. Mom was always too busy with Scott. "Your brother's going through a rough time," Brandon explained during one call, his voice tired. "He's hanging out with the wrong crowd." "I'm guessing Mom thinks you're being too hard on him?" I interrupted. "Exactly," he sighed. "She called me a tyrant just for suggesting he needs some structure. She keeps saying I don't understand how sensitive he is." As Scott's behavior got worse, my visits home became less frequent. When I did visit, he barely noticed me. He stayed shut in his room, glued to his video games. The few times I saw him, he looked pale and angry, his eyes fixed on a screen. "Scott, want to grab lunch?" "My treat," I asked one day, knocking on his door. The only reply I got was the sound of gunfire from his video game. Mom passed by in the hallway and shrugged. "He's not feeling social today. He's under a lot of stress, you know." The difference between our lives couldn't have been clearer. While I was building a career, Scott was chasing achievements in video games, with Mom making endless excuses for him. Brandon's face said everything. He was disappointed. But by then, even he had mostly given up trying to help Scott. At 28, I finally saved enough to buy my own place. It wasn't big, just a one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, but it was all mine. The day I got the keys felt like a new chapter in my life. I couldn't stop smiling. Years of saving money by skipping fancy lunches and saying no to expensive clothes had finally paid off. "You all have to come see it," I said during my weekly call home. "I'm having a housewarming party next Friday, and I'll cook dinner." "Brandon, I'm even making your favorite lasagna." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo," Brandon replied warmly. Then Mom's voice chimed in. "Oh, honey, I don't think we can make it. Scott has plans that day." "Plans?" I asked, unable to hide the doubt in my voice. "What kind of plans?" "Very important ones," Mom said vaguely. In the background, I could hear Scott's video game blaring. The day of the housewarming, only Brandon showed up. He brought me a potted plant and a bottle of wine. "Your mother sends her love," he said, though we both knew that wasn't true. Over dinner, Brandon told me what was really going on at home. Scott, now 21, had skipped college and spent his days either gaming or hanging out with his drinking buddies. Brandon had tried to help, even offering Scott a starting job at his construction company. "Everyone has to start somewhere," Brandon explained as he twirled pasta on his fork. "But Melissa," he shook his head. "She said it was beneath him." "Beneath him?" I asked, my frustration growing. Scott's too smart to work, but not too smart to live off you and Mom? Brandon gave me a tired, sad smile. I keep trying, Karen. God knows, I keep trying. That was the last real conversation we ever had. 3 years later, I got the call that changed everything. Brandon had collapsed at work from a massive heart attack, just like my father. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. The funeral felt unreal. Mom made a big show of crying, sobbing loudly and telling everyone what a wonderful husband Brandon had been. We were so happy, she wailed. How will we manage without him? I watched her performance with a mix of pity and disgust. Those tears weren't for Brandon. They were for herself. I could see Mom's mind working behind her grief-stricken act. Brandon had been the only one bringing in money, and without his income, how would she continue supporting Scott in the lifestyle he was used to? Scott didn't even bother to dress properly for the funeral. He showed up in wrinkled khakis and a worn-out polo shirt. During most of the service, he stared at his phone while Mom made excuses for him. He's processing his grief in his own way, she said. As I stood at Brandon's grave, I couldn't stop thinking about how history was repeating itself. Another father figure, another heart attack, another funeral. But this time, I was old enough to see things clearly, including the fact that Mom's tears were more for her empty bank account than a broken heart. A year after Brandon's death, I barely kept in touch with Mom and Scott. The little I knew came from Aunt Brenda's occasional calls. They're getting by on Brandon's savings, she told me once. Your mom sold his Chevrolet last month, and his workshop tools went before that. I try not to care. I really did. But when Mom's number popped up on my phone one Sunday evening, my heart still skipped a beat. Karen. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I need you to come home. Please. There was something in her tone that made me book a flight the very next day. When I pulled up to our old house, I barely recognized it. The lawn Brandon had kept perfectly manicured was now overgrown with weeds. The paint on the windows was peeling, and one of the shutters hung crooked. But the house wasn't the only thing that had changed. When Mom opened the door, I had to stop myself from gasping. The vibrant woman I remembered looked like she had aged 30 years. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles, and her hair, once always dyed and styled perfectly, showed gray roots. Come in, she said, leading me to the living room. The house smelled musty, and dishes were piled up in the sink. A thin layer of dust covered the furniture. This was the same woman who used to make me rewash dishes if there was even one water spot on them. Mom, I said, looking around in disbelief. What's going on? I asked, settling onto the couch. A spring poked into my leg, another thing Brandon would have fixed right away. Mom broke down almost immediately. We're running out of money, Karen, she said, her voice shaking. My pension barely covers the utilities and the savings. She twisted her hands in her lap. They're almost gone. What about Scott? Is he helping with expenses? I asked. Her face shifted between embarrassment and defensiveness. He's looking for work. It's not his fault. These employers just don't understand him. One job wanted him to start at 9 a.m. You know Scott's not a morning person. And another expected him to do manual labor. With his intelligence, I felt my jaw tighten. Mom, at his age and with no experience, he can't afford to be picky. You don't understand, she snapped, her voice rising in that familiar tone she used whenever defending Scott. Then, just as quickly, her voice softened, almost pleading. Karen, we need your help. We won't make it without you. I hate to ask, but you're doing so well in your career. I knew what was coming. A part of me wanted to say no, to remind her of all the times she had put Scott first and left me to fend for myself. But when I looked at her tired face, her trembling hands, and her desperate eyes, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. How much do you need? I asked reluctantly. When she said $2,000 a month, I nearly choked. That was a big chunk of my paycheck, but somehow I nodded. Where's Scott now? I asked as I got ready to leave, already regretting my decision. Oh, he's at a job interview, Mom said, her tone brightening. It's a very promising position with a tech company. Through the window, I saw the light from Scott's bedroom and the familiar flicker of his computer screen. Some things never changed. True to my word, I set up an automatic transfer of $2,000 to Mom's account every month. Each time I saw the deduction in my bank balance, I told myself it was the right thing to do, even if it meant delaying my plans for a bigger apartment or a new car. I started visiting more often, but each visit felt like stepping into a time warp. Scott was always there, either glued to his computer or lying on the couch with a beer in hand. "How's the job search going?" I'd ask. "Mind your own business," he'd snap, or sometimes he'd just grunt and turn up the volume on his game. During the holidays, I couldn't ignore how rundown the living room had become. The wallpaper was peeling, and a water stain on the ceiling, something that would have driven Brandon crazy, stood out like a sore thumb. I used my Christmas bonus to hire contractors to fix it up. In January, Mom sprained her ankle. When I called to check on her, she said, "Oh, it's not so bad," though I could hear the pain in her voice. "Is Scott helping you?" I asked. "He's busy with some online interviews," she replied. The next day, I hired a home health aide and used the money I'd been saving for a vacation to cover her wages for 4 weeks. Then one day, I walked into the house and found a stranger sprawled on the sofa. She looked like someone straight out of a reality TV show, long fake nails, heavy makeup, and clothes that barely cover her. She was scrolling through her phone, surrounded by empty chip bags and soda cans. "Who are you?" I asked, though I already had a bad feeling. Scott appeared from his room. "This is Laura," he said. "My fiancée. She lives here now." Laura didn't even glance up. She just popped her gum loudly and grabbed a pack of cookies I'd brought for Mom from the grocery bag. "Nice to meet you too," I muttered under my breath. Later that evening, I called Mom to get her take on the situation. She sounded more excited than she had in months. "Oh, Karen, isn't it wonderful? Scott's finally settling down. Laura's been such a good influence on him. He hasn't gone out drinking with those terrible friends in weeks. That's because she's drinking all my imported beer at home," I thought, remembering the empty bottles in the recycling bin. But I bit my tongue. "And he's talking about getting a job," Mom continued, clearly thrilled. "Laura's cousin knows someone at a tech startup. Scott says it could be his big break." I made vague noises in response, pretending to agree, but my mind was stuck on the countless big breaks Scott had talked about over the years. Mom was so happy in her little bubble of endless hope that I couldn't bring myself to burst it. My next visit started like any other. I juggled grocery bags as I pushed open the front door and froze. The house was a disaster. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, takeout containers scattered across the furniture, and clothes were thrown all over the living room. It looked like a tornado had hit. Laura was sprawled on the couch, her perfectly manicured nails tapping away on her phone. She didn't even glance up as I set the groceries down. "You know," I said sharply, "you live here for free, eating food I pay for. The least you could do is wash a dish." She slowly looked up, a smirk curling on her overly glossed lips. "Who do you think you are, coming in here giving orders? This isn't your house." "I grew up here," I snapped. "You're just a guest." That's when she laughed, a cold, mocking sound that made my stomach turn. "Oh, honey, you've got it all wrong. This house belongs to Scott now. Your mom signed everything over to him. There's a will and everything." I found Mom in the kitchen, shuffling through coupons she'd never use. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Did you leave everything to Scott?" She didn't look at me at first, fiddling with the papers in front of her. Then her face changed, hardening. "Yes," she said flatly. "It's true." "I don't understand," I whispered. "I'm the one helping you. I'm the one sending money every month. Scott doesn't work. He doesn't do anything. Don't you dare talk about your brother like that." Mom's voice rose sharply. "You don't understand him. You never have." "Understand what?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "That he's a parasite? That he's perfectly happy to live off my money while his girlfriend trashes this house." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Mom snapped, her face twisting into an expression I didn't recognize. Then she said the words that hit like a punch to the gut. You want the truth? I never loved you the way I love Scott. He's better than you in every way that matters. And I don't want to see you here anymore. Her words felt like a physical blow. For years, I had convinced myself that Mom did love me. Maybe not as much as Scott, but in her own way. I thought that deep down, somewhere beneath her obsession with him, she cared about me too. But now I knew the truth. She didn't. I turned and walked out, Laura's mocking laughter echoing down the hall. 31st years of hoping, making excuses, and trying to earn my mom's love ended with the quiet click of the door closing behind me. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the 4-hour trip, climbing the stairs to my apartment, or sitting down on my couch. But I do remember the moment of clarity that came as I stared at my phone. My banking app showed the automatic transfer to Mom's account, $2000 every month for the past year. My finger hovered over the screen for a second before I clicked cancel recurring payment. For the next few weeks, I buried myself in work, trying to ignore the empty spot in my budget. But instead of feeling like a loss, it felt like an opportunity. I started researching investments, imagining saving for a real house, something I could finally call my own, not just an apartment. Exactly 1 month after my last visit, Mom called. The money didn't come through, she said, skipping any greeting. No hello. No how are you? There's no mistake, I said calmly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I canceled the transfers. There was silence for a moment. Then she exploded. You what? How dare you? After everything I've done for you. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Everything you've done for me? Like what, Mom? Ignoring me? Making me clean up after Scott? Telling me you never loved me? That's different, she snapped, using her usual defensive tone whenever Scott was involved. You know I was upset. But you can't just stop helping us. We're counting on that money. Scott and Laura are planning a vacation to Cancun. They need it. I felt my anger rise. A vacation? Scott needs a vacation from what, exactly? Sitting around, playing video games, and drinking beer? Scott doesn't need a vacation, Mom. He needs a job. How dare you speak about your brother like that, she yelled. You're just jealous because… Because what? I interrupted. Because you gave everything to him?
Fine. You made your choice, Mom.
Now he can take care of you? You ungrateful, selfish little… The rest of her rant dissolved into a stream of insults and demands. I let her go on for a moment before cutting in. Goodbye, Mom. Don't call me again. Then I hung up, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders for the first time in years. I blocked Mom's number before she could reply, but she wasn't finished. Over the next few weeks, messages flooded in from every possible place. Facebook posts about how she was struggling to pay bills. Instagram comments calling me a terrible daughter. Emails listing all the sacrifices she claimed to have made for me, most of which I didn't even remember. Scott joined in too, sending angry texts accusing me of destroying the family. One message read, Mom's crying because of you. You better start sending money again, or else. Before blocking him, I replied, here's an idea. Try getting a job. Even Laura got involved, reaching out through LinkedIn of all places. She sent a long message about how I was breaking my mother's heart and how Scott was too sensitive to handle the stress of working. I had to give her credit for being creative, at least. It's been 7 months now, and I have no idea how they're doing. For the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty about that. Maybe they've realized Scott needs to take care of himself. Maybe they're still waiting for me to cave and start sending money again. Or maybe they've found someone else to manipulate. The truth is, I don't need to know. What I do know is that the $2,000 I used to send them every month is now sitting in my savings account, growing into a down payment for my own house. I know I sleep better at night, no longer jolted awake by angry messages or guilt-tripping calls. And I know Brandon would be proud of me for finally standing up for myself. The other day, I drove past a construction site with a "now hiring" sign. For a moment, I thought about snapping a picture and sending it to Scott. But instead, I just smiled and kept driving. Their problems aren't my problems anymore. After all these years, I'm finally free.